Department of Labor should amend its hazard order regulations to permit teenage workers access to work in regulated jobs with proper training and parental consent.
At some point, this starts to feel like parody, right? Like, send 8-year-olds off to the acid mines while gutting the Department of Labor. Sure, why the hell not, right? Like, these people read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and they thought it was an instructional manual.
Welcome to Law and Chaos. Today, we're getting into the nitty-gritty on Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's 922-page manifesto, which lays out their plan to transform America into a Christo-fascist state if Trump wins in November.
Yeah, vote for Kamala Harris.
Then we got a deep dive on Schedule F, which is a proposal to return to the 1850s with extra loyalty oaths. We got a lot to cover, so let's get after it. Happy Friday, Chaos Monkeys. I'm Liz Dye, and with me, as always, is Andrew Torres. Andrew, how are you?
I'm great, Liz. How are you doing?
I mean, I've spent a lot of time reading Project 2025, so
I know.
I'm terrified.
And we should be. Look, before we get into the meat of the show, I want to plug our latest newsletter post that came out yesterday, GOP Whines That It's No Fair That Kamala Gets Joe's Money, in which we break down the FEC complaint filed by the Trump campaign. TLDR, yes, it was perfectly legal for Biden to file an amended Form 1 with the FEC, change the name of his principal campaign committee to Harris for President, and let Kamala spend the money. Trump's complaint is nonsense, and even if it wasn't, the FEC won't act on it. And even if they do, it won't be before the 2024 election. And even if it would be, it would turn out to be a good thing for Harris because she could then exploit a loophole in per-candidate fundraising limits. So, look, this is just a desperate attempt by the Trump campaign to deflect everyone's attention away from J.D. Vance's couch-related extracurricular activities.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You were the one who introduced me to it.
I did. I have this thing, you guys, where I'm like, Andrew, this is what's happening on the internet. Have you heard about J.D. Vance and the couch? And he'll be like, no. I'm like, oh my God, can you just Google it and not make me have to explain it? And to his credit, he did. Okay, we are, of course, going to talk today about Project 2025. We'll spend the whole day on it. So before we do that, how about we play a fun little clip?
And you, I'm sure, have seen their agenda, Project 2025. Randy, can you believe they put that thing in writing? 900 pages in writing.
I'm with Kamala.
I too cannot believe that they wrote all this down where we could see it. We're talking about the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for the Trump administration, which, as we said, is terrifying. It is no exaggeration to say that this is a plan for an autocratic takeover of the country, reshaping modern life to conform to conservative values. It's gotten a lot of press, and rightly so, since it is monstrous. And Trump has been trying for weeks now to distance himself from it, which is ridiculous. Like, upwards of 100 individual contributors to this document are alumni of the first Trump administration. It's got buy-in from 125 conservative organizations, although a couple of them have unbought in thanks to all the bad publicity.
Yeah, well, let's keep that coming.
Yeah, and J.D. Couchman Vance is like best friends with Kevin Roberts, who is the guy who wrote the foreword and kind of compiled this document, and he's the president of the Heritage Foundation, and he's on the short list to be Trump's chief of staff if Trump gets back to the White House, God forbid. So their theory of the case is that Trump was stymied in implementing his policy agenda the first time by the deep state. I mean, actually, no, let me take that back a little bit. They know that Trump is purely transactional. That's always been their game. They know that Trump has no actual policy beliefs other than he wants to hurt his enemies and reward his friends and be the center of attention all the time. Mm-hmm. These true believers, if you want to call them that, know that Trump needs someone to run the country, and they can deliver evangelical votes to him, which, is what put him in the White House. That's what the Heritage Foundation does, and their goal is to impose Christian theocracy. What happened the last time around, though, if you remember, Steve Bannon and Steve Miller spent the first year of Trump's presidency cooking up these wild, facially illegal executive orders and having them sort of fall apart, detonate on impact, sort of like the Muslim ban, which just never worked. And partly they got stopped by the courts, and in part they were sort of slow walked by the executive branch itself.
Yeah, and look, I remember after the 2016 election when all of us were going through the various Kubler-Ross stages, right? Like Democrats were trying to reassure themselves that, things wouldn't be so bad because, the blob would restrain Trump and he would be forced to govern like a normal Republican, or else there would be all these defections or, and I don't know what passed for a normal Republican 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I know what does now, right? But the important thing is, that was all wrong. And if you were not sufficiently terrified of Trump 2024, imagine that with more competence coming in, right? And that's what Project 2025 is about. It is a very detailed plan with chapters for each of the major executive branch departments. They intend to hit the ground running in 2025, having a full staff of MAGA loyalists ready to descend on Washington, D.C. And they do not want civil servants who are, competent and nonpartisan. They want nothing but true believers loyal to no one but Trump himself. And that is why a key pillar of the Project 2025 program is to gut the civil service. They want to make the entire branch political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president and can be fired for not pledging loyalty oaths to Donald Trump.
Yeah. So I will lay out some of the batshit stuff in this document, and then Andrew, you can break down how they plan to destroy the government.
I have the deepest of deep dives. Like I am so excited about this.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, you guys. I texted Andrew this morning and I was like, how about you take the Schedule F portion? And he was like, I don't know what Schedule F is. And I'm like, it's the way that they want to gut the civil service. And boy, did you understood the assignment. Let's put it like that. And that's good because we know the fans love a good spelunking. So, okay, let's get into this. I am aiming to do 20 hideous proposals from this document, although it could easily be 220. We will put 5 of these disaster proposals in the Patreon since there's a lot here. All right, beginning with number 1. I cannot stress to you guys enough how much this document is an attack on trans people, on their very existence. Basically, Project 2025, the Heritage guys, think that they're going to fix America by defining transgender people's existence in public as obscenity and then banning it. So, look, I know that there have been a lot of jokes about they want to ban porn, and I have made some of them myself. That's not really what they want. They want to define transgender and LGBTQ plus people as porn. Frankly speaking. So here's what they say. Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered.
That is as wrong can be. Right. So let's start at face value. The First Amendment absolutely protects the right to produce and consume pornography. But Liz, as you said, in some sense, dealing with this as a legal issue is the wrong argument. Because if you're arguing about that, you've bought into the premise that they're talking about banning pornography, which, look, like, they're not trying to take down Pornhub. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think they would mind that either. But the plan, as you said, is to define LGBTQ plus people themselves, particularly trans folks, as deviant and dangerous and inherently obscene, so that talking about their issues at all is what they call porn.
Right. That's why they're talking about librarians and teachers and locking them up, right? You're not going to the library to get pornography. They are defining.
Yeah, those computers are out in the open in the library.
Exactly. So trans bashing is baked into every aspect of this document. I cannot stress to you enough that that's what this is about. They talk about, restoring standards of lethality and excellence to the military by expelling all transgender service members and anyone who is HIV positive. They want to essentially nationalize Florida's Don't Say Gay law. They want to make it illegal to call a student by anything other than the name on their birth certificate without parental consent. They want to ban not just using appropriate pronouns, but, here's a passage from their plans for the State Department. In addition, the next conservative administration should rescind President Biden's 2022 gender policy and refocus it on women, children, and families, and revise the agency's regulation on integrating gender equality and female empowerment in USAID's program cycle. It should remove all references, examples, definitions, photos, and language on USAID websites, in agency publications and policies, and in all agency contracts and grants that include the following terms: gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender diverse individuals, gender aware, gender sensitive, etc. It should also remove references to abortion, reproductive health, and sexual and reproductive rights and controversial sexual education materials. Continuing. In the past, the word gender was a polite alternative to the word sex or term biological sex. The left has commandeered the term gender, which used to mean either male or female, to include a spectrum of others who are seeking to alter biological and societal sexual norms. The promotion of gender radicalism is anathema to the traditional norms of many societies where USAID works, causes resentment by tying life-saving assistance to rejecting the aid recipient's own firmly held fundamental values regarding sexuality, and produces unnecessary consternation and confusion among, and even outright bias against, men. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So look, this is a war on LGBTQ plus people. And first and foremost, it's a power grab, obviously, but the red meat that these guys want to feed to the base is pure gay bashing. So, yeah, it's pretty upsetting. Okay, it will not surprise you that number 2 is abortion, which they plan to ban nationally.
Hey, Liz, remember in the Dobbs opinion when Sam Alito said now the issue was going to be appropriately returned to the states?
Remember believing a word that comes out of that flag-humping asshole's mouth?
No, I did not.
No, not once. Okay, so there is so much dystopian shit here, particularly in the chapter on the Department of Health and Human Services, which is written by a guy named Roger Severino, who was the director of the Office of Civil Rights at HHS under Trump. Obviously, though, Trump has never met these guys. He doesn't know them or whatever. So Severino proposes to rescind the FDA's authorization of mifepristone, the most commonly used drug for medication abortions, and he plans to enforce the Comstock Act.
Of 1873.
Exactly. So he plans to use this law, which we've talked about it a bunch on the show, but it was a ban on mailing birth control and pornography, via the U.S. Postal Service. It's largely been challenged and nobody's used it, but the conservatives are talking about reviving it. And here Severino wants to use it to ban not only using the mail-to-ship mifepristone, but all so-called abortifacients, including the morning after pill. And by the way, there are plenty of people in the conservative movement who believe that IUDs are abortifacients since they prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg. So Severino also wants to increase what he calls abortion surveillance, which is... Yeah, you know what? I'm going to read you a little section of this so you guys can get the full Handmaid's Tale impact here. The CDC's abortion surveillance and maternity mortality reporting systems are woefully inadequate. CDC abortion data are reported by states on a voluntary basis, and California, Maryland, and New Hampshire do not submit abortion data at all. God. No, that was me, not him. Accurate and reliable statistical data about abortion, abortion survivors, and abortion-related maternal deaths are essential to timely, reliable public health and policy analysis. Because liberal states have now become sanctuaries for abortion tourism, HHS should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. It should also ensure that statistics are separated by category: spontaneous miscarriage, treatments that incidentally result in the death of a child, such as chemotherapy, stillbirths, and induced abortion. In addition, CDC should require monitoring and reporting for complications due to abortion and every instance of children being born alive after an abortion, which is not a thing.
Yeah. On the one hand, +1 for consistency to these guys, right? At least we know they hate all forms of the right to privacy, minus several million for supposedly being the party of small government.
Yeah. So Severino plans to ban the mention of abortion and to fund studies into the risks and complications of abortion and ensure that it corrects and does not promote misinformation regarding the comparative health and psychological benefits of childbirth versus the health and psychological risks of intentionally taking a human life through abortion. And He wants to drive investigative review of literature for a variety of issues, including the effect of abortion on prematurity and breast cancer. So basically all the bullshit they tell you at crisis pregnancy centers about abortion causing depression, infertility, and breast cancer, he wants to make that government policy.
And let's be clear here, none of that is true. None of that is backed by science in any way whatsoever.
Correct. Which leads us to number 3, which is birth control.
Birth control, right? Do you remember, Liz, when we talked about Dobbs in the wake of that decision coming out? We pointed out that Griswold v. Connecticut was next because the right to contraception is based on the exact same right to privacy. And, people said, oh, no, Republicans aren't going to try and roll back birth control to the 19th century.
Yes, they are. And on that topic, Severino says, CDC should update its public messaging about the unsurpassed effectiveness of modern fertility awareness-based methods of family planning and stop publishing communications that conflate such methods with the long-eclipsed rhythm or calendar methods. CDC should fund studies exploring the evidence-based methods used in cutting-edge fertility awareness. Okay, no. The difference between the rhythm method and the fertility awareness method is basically taking your temperature and tracking your cycle more closely rather than just counting the days and assuming you have a perfect 28-day menstrual cycle. Fertility awareness methods are only marginally more effective than the rhythm method when used perfectly. And let's be clear, most people don't use them perfectly. So to describe fertility awareness as showing unsurpassed effectiveness is just a blatant lie. Roughly 1 in 5 women who uses the rhythm method or rhythm method 2, electric boogaloo, or whatever the hell they're calling it, is going to get pregnant in the course of a year. Virtually every other modern birth control method is significantly more effective, including, of course, good old-fashioned condoms, which, by the way, they want to remove from the basket of women's health care coverage because apparently women are not protected by condoms.
I honestly do not know what to say to people whose understanding of basic human biology is so completely deficient.
I mean, they're super into protecting women, right?
Oh, okay.
But the main tool that they use for that is at number 4, marriage.
And something tells me they do not mean Adam and Steve marriage here.
No, they do not. Basically, they see it as the government's job to encourage heterosexual marriage and a completely retrograde view of gender roles.
Yeah, as Roberts says in his intro, fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. So many of the problems government programs are designed to solve but can't are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are headed towards social implosion. Liz, I really cannot tell you how much it makes the hairs on my neck stand on end to see people this close to power treating it as a given that government should encourage people to get married to make sure that kids do not reject, their words, the church.
The church. Yeah. I don't go to the church. Anyway, the point.
Me neither.
Sorry. So in this document, marriage is basically the cure-all for everything, including transgenderism, because if kids get, quote, both the love and nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father, note these retrograde things.
Fathers can't nurture? Okay, good.
Exactly.
Good to know.
So I think their idea is that if you have a mother and a father in their, appropriate gender roles in the home, children will understand that gender is fixed and immutable and that thinking otherwise is porn. So seriously, their solution for STIs, tell the kids to get married, child support enforcement, tell the men they'll pay less if they, get married to their wives and then they won't have child support.
True proposal. I wish we could go into that one. Yeah.
Birth control, little lady, you wouldn't need that at all if you just embraced your destiny as a baby factory and stayed in your marriage. They also want states to be able to take Title X money for family planning and use it for, quote, marriage education. Through religious charities, by the way. Anything else is woke. So that's all terrible. And if you're a patron at any level at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or on Substack, we will get right to the war on woke. And if not, we will see you after this brief ad break.
And it's time to thank our new subscribers. So over on Substack, a big thank you to Justin Rosario, David Trick, Nick S., and Luke Lawyer.
And thank you to David Dwayne Bonebreak, LED Duncan, William Lippincott, and Gabriella Malova.
And thanks to our new patrons over at patreon.com/LonCastPod, Matthew Roy, Nathan Foster, this is all one name, and I love you, whoever you are, Bendover, Jacques Strapp, Alcoholic, Oliver Closeoff, Seymour Butts, Mike Roch, Huge Ass, B.O. Problem, Amanda Hug and Kiss, and it cuts off Ivana Tinkle, but I got your back. Thanks to John Daniels, Teteme, Sasquatchian, Basic, Canuck with a Buck, yeah, that's all it takes, Jason Weatherly, John Rice, Louise Nelson, Matthew Spiegel, and Tom Hamilton.
And thank you to Josh Frome, Kevin Kelleher, Rufus Mario, Michael Knowles, Kaylin, Lynn R., Charlie Broderick, Deborah Lee, Donut, James Allen, Travis L., and please don't publish my name, which we apparently did not.
We did not, yeah. So, and if you'd like a shout out, you know how to do that. Just head on over patreon.com/LonCastPod. Sign up, give us as little as $1. You could be a Canuck with $1. And we'll shout you out. You'll get the ad-free versions of the show. You'll get the extended shows. You get all the goodies. You know what to do.
All right, let's get back into it. Because we are ready for number 5, which is the war on DEI. You guys, I swear this document uses the word diversicrats and not as a joke. You get it? All right, look, no surprise. They would like to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, they would like to use the government to go after anyone in the public or private sector who engages in discrimination.
Yeah, and while that would be a laudable goal, by discrimination, they mean hires too many brown people or, admits too many non-white, non-cis-het men to their school.
Yeah, one of these days we're going to get to talk about that FACEORP lawsuit.
Oh, FACEORP, yeah.
This is it's these goobers that actually anonymously are suing University of Chicago because they say that it's too woke, which actually, honestly, University of Chicago, of all the schools, does not have a reputation for intense wokeitude. Okay, but back to this document, because I got to read you guys this proposal to de-wokify the Treasury Department. Here's what they say. Identify every Treasury official who participated in DEI initiatives and interview him or her for the purpose of determining the scope and nature of these initiatives and to ensure that such initiatives are completely ended. Make public immediately all communications relating to the work of the Treasury's critical race theory and DEI initiatives. Treat the participation in any critical race theory or DEI initiative without objecting on constitutional or moral grounds as per se grounds for termination of employment.
Did I miss Secretary of the Treasury Kimberly Crenshaw? No, the Treasury Department has not been on a critical race theory spree as of late, right? But okay, I think I got to jump in and do a couple here because your forehead looks like it's about to burst a blood vessel. But how about number 6? Abolishing the Department of Education in its entirety. This is how that chapter begins. Quote, federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately, the federal Department of Education should be eliminated. Basically, they want to turn the entire shebang into a system of block grants and vouchers that, would hollow out public education in this country forever.
Love it.
Yeah. How about number 7? These all are kind of hand in glove. Number 7 is eliminate Head Start. The wildly successful subsidized program that pays for childcare for 820,000 poor kids between the ages of 3 and 5. This section is just based on a bunch of lies about Head Start being a haven for abuse and not having long-term positive outcomes for kids. That again, you've got the Google machine. It's just blatantly false.
Yeah, I mean, their premise is that kids should be home with their mother, who conveniently does not have to work in their fantasy world. So from that perspective, Head Start is a total failure because, if your goal is to erode the economic power of women, Head Start, which allows women to reenter the workforce, it's terrible.
Yeah, I love that at the end of this paragraph saying, all these obvious lies about how terrible Head Start is, they say, at the very least, the program's COVID-19 vaccine and mask requirements should be rescinded. Axe it, but if not, at least make sure the kids get as sick as possible, right? And by the way, while they're kicking poor kids, how about number 8, which is eliminate student lunches? These people are just so unspeakably vile. How do you get yourself worked up about feeding kids, right? Other industrialized nations, pretty much all of them, have universal school lunch. And, they manage to run a functioning economy. And every available piece of social science research shows that nutrition is the most important determinant for future success by whatever metric you want to use. Like, want to reduce criminal recidivism in poor communities? Feed inmates, right? But now Republicans take it as an article of faith that literally anything the government does to help people is socialism. So these ghouls want to cut any expansion of the program to feed all kids and rejigger the formula so that individual schools would have to qualify rather than, states aggregating all the schools in a region and saying, across this region, there's need, so we're going to have lunch for every kid in that region. Oh, and also they want to kick kids off the program in summer if they're not enrolled in summer school because, if you're a fourth grader who passed your classes, you could just starve for 3 months. Like, literally, this document complains that, quote, currently, students can get meals from schools even if they're not in summer school, which has, in effect, turned school meals into a federal catering program. End actual quote.
Yeah, maybe the kids can eat marriage or something. I don't know. These people are so filthy. All right, let's keep going because if we stop here and cry, we'll never get up. So, number 9, cancel all student loan forgiveness because, of course, that's socialism. In fact, they want to claw back any student loans which have already been forgiven because fuck them kids. That's not a literal quote, but it's not that far off. Eventually, these guys want to privatize all student loans, but until that happens, they want to treat them as an economic investment for the government, raising interest payments by about $3,000 a year per borrower, according to the Center for American Progress. And you know how we have loan forgiveness now for borrowers who do socially valuable things with their degrees, like serve in rural communities or, work with poor kids who become teachers or whatever.
Sounds like socialism to me.
Yeah, sounds like socialism to the Project 2025 assholes too. Number 10, they want to make it easier for kids to work in dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
Get ready for this actual quote, you guys. Some young adults show an interest in inherently dangerous jobs. Current rules forbid many young people, even if their family is running the business, from working in such jobs. This results in worker shortages in dangerous fields and often discourages otherwise interested young workers from trying the more dangerous job. With parental consent and proper training, certain young adults should be allowed to learn and work in more dangerous occupations. This would give a green light to training programs and build skills in teenagers who may want to work in these fields. Department of Labor should amend its hazard order regulations to permit teenage workers access to work in regulated jobs with proper training and parental consent.
At some point, this starts to feel like parody, right? Send 8-year-olds off to the acid mines while gutting the Department of Labor. Sure, why the hell not, right? These people read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and they thought it was an instructional manual.
Yeah, well, speaking of child abuse, we're going to put kids back in tents again.
Sure.
No, I don't mean to be glib, because that was awful and an absolute moral stain on the country. But the sections on immigration are simply stomach-churning. So, number 11, ICE should be funded for a significant increase in detention space, raising the daily available number of beds to 100,000. That's because the current policy is to release migrants pending a hearing when they arrive here. I mean, we have a lot of people locked up, but the Project 2025 guys and Trump himself have said that they want to end the release programs. Instead, they want to put people in concentration camps pending review.
Yeah, and look, I know it sounds like we're using incendiary language here, but that is very clearly what these people intend. They want to lock tens of thousands of people who committed no crime in purpose-built prison cities for months at a time, and that is a concentration camp.
100%. And for number 12, they want to end the Flores settlement.
And that is also putting kids in tents, right? The document says Congress must end the Flores settlement agreement by explicitly setting nationwide terms and standards for family and unaccompanied detention and housing. Such standards should focus on meeting human needs and should allow for large-scale use of temporary facilities, for example, tents, right? So
literally verbatim.
Yeah. So what is the Flores settlement? In 1985, the ACLU sued the Reagan administration over its mistreatment of Jenny Flores, a 15-year-old girl who was a political refugee fleeing the civil war in El Salvador. Upon arriving in the land of the free, she was strip-searched, detained, locked in a juvenile detention facility, and denied minimally decent treatment that convicted criminals get, like access to education and basic recreational activities, all while preparing to deport her back to a war zone. That litigation dragged on for 12 years until the Clinton administration negotiated a settlement. In exchange for Flores dropping her lawsuit, the government agreed to release unaccompanied children at the border to their relatives, set a maximum of 20 days for detaining minors, and agreed to maintain humane treatment standards and living conditions. So to be pellucidly clear, this applies to unaccompanied children at the border, and this is what Republicans want to undo. And yes, we could do an entire show on just the Flores settlement alone, but you get the picture.
I mean, God forbid we'll have to, because if they get back into office, we are going to have to do a whole entire show on the Flores settlement.
Yeah, vote for Kamala Harris. Donate to Kamala Harris. Work for
Jeez
Kamala
Louise.
Harris. Yeah.
100%. Okay. Number 13, they want to end visas for victims of crime and human trafficking. That's T and U visas. They say victimization should not be a basis for an immigration benefit. If an alien who was a trafficking or crime victim is actively and significantly cooperating with law enforcement as a witness, the S visa is already available and should be used. Pending elimination of T and U visas, the Secretary should significantly restrict eligibility for each visa to prevent fraud. They also would like to repeal Section 235 of the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, which provides numerous immigration benefits to unaccompanied alien children and only encourages more parents to send their children across the border illegally and unaccompanied.
Yeah, that culture of life for the win.
Mm-hmm. Number 14. Remember when Trump said that the Finns never have forest fires because they rake the forest?
Look, if Project 2025 has a national raking initiative, it will be by far the best proposal in that document.
Sadly, no. Instead, we're going to log the shit out of the forest, and then there'll be nothing left to burn. Easy peasy.
I can't argue with that.
No. All right. They say increasing timber sales could also play an important role in the effort to change the behavior of wildfire because there would be less biomass. Timber sales and timber harvested in public forests dropped precipitously in the early 1990s and still remain very low. So this is their plan to solve that. They will reduce regulatory obstacles to fuel reduction in forests created by the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act, which is bad. But on the plus side, number 15, you guys, they finally found an ecosystem they care about. Reading from the document. In 1971, Congress ordered the BLM, that's the Bureau of Land Management, to manage wild horses and burros to ensure their iconic presence never disappeared from the Western landscape. For decades, Congress watched as these herds overwhelmed the land's ability to sustain them, crowded out indigenous plant and other animal species, threatened the survival of species listed under the Endangered Species Act, invaded private and permitted public land, disturbed private property rights, and turned the sod into concrete. BLM experts said in 2019 that some affected land will never recover from this unmitigated damage.
Okay, Liz. Look, neither one of us is in any position to opine on the wisdom of Western land management. No, fair. But I do think it's a little bit ironic that the one time these guys object to the despoliation of the earth, it's an excuse to slaughter horses. Right? Like, yeah. Look, I could get on board if maybe this was concern for the Endangered Species Act. And, if that was coming from people who weren't constantly snarking about, the lesser spotted woodland slug or, whatever as the reductive way to diminish environmentalism compared to the magical wonders of late stage capitalism.
That's quite a rant, sir. All right.
And if you're a patron at any level, we've got an extended bonus for you right now. And if not, you will go on to the rest of the show. And we're back. Okay, Liz, that was horrible. I want to drill down on Project 2025's Schedule F proposal, right? Which is a proposal to bring back one of the most corrupt aspects of 1850s politics. So our story begins.
Don't say it.
In 1828, with perhaps the dumbest manufactured scandal to ever come out of Washington, D.C.
I mean, I remember Dan sued Obama, although we've now had J.D. Vance on the couch, so.
Yeah. So, okay, all right. Let me know how this one measures up, right? It involves actually an incredibly fascinating woman named Peggy Eaton, who was, in the words of one historian, forthright, uncouth, impure, forward and worldly, and prone to speaking her mind in public.
I love her.
Yeah, me too. So she was married to President Andrew Jackson's Secretary of War, a guy named John Eaton, and she drew the ire of one of the worst villains in American history, John C. Calhoun, Jackson's vice president, and his wife, Floride. Okay, that's Floride. So I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Anyway,
Fluoride?
As you might imagine,
Fluoride?
worse than... Huh? Yeah.
That sounds like fluoride to me. Sorry.
Anyway, worse than Andrew Jackson is a pretty low bar to limbo under, but, Calhoun did it. So anyway, Fluoride Calhoun arranged for all of the traditionalist wives in the cabinet to shun. Yeah, it was a male cabinet. So the wives got together. They all agreed to shun Peggy Eaton and not invite her to any cotillions and somehow that led to a scandalo. I mean, these people were called, this is why this is called the petticoat scandal. Right? The wives were called petticoats, right? So, and in addition to not socializing with Eaton, the petticoat faction started opposing Andrew Jackson politically, right? Looking to maneuver to get his even more racist vice president, the aforementioned John C. Calhoun, to take away the Democratic nomination in 1832. So Jackson was left with a cabinet where most of the members hated him and were looking to stab him in the back. And this, by the way, is where the informal kitchen cabinet tradition begins, right? But I will spare you that rabbit trail given how late it is in the show already. Liz, I did tell you this is a weird one.
Yeah, you did not lie.
So, against this backdrop, enter Secretary of State, future president, and at this point in time, because it was beneficial to his interests, Jackson loyalist Martin Van Buren, who came up with the following plan, which I guess made a ton of sense in 1831. Anyway, Van Buren was Secretary of State. He was going to resign, and that would then give Andrew Jackson cover to ask for the resignation of all of the rest of the petticoat members in his cabinet. And
I watch Heathers, so this makes complete sense to me. No, I'm kidding. This makes no sense.
But it makes no sense or not, it worked. So in April 1831, Van Buren resigned as Secretary of State, and then so did the rest of the anti-Eaton members of Jackson's cabinet, with the lone exception of the Postmaster General. That I guess.
Louis DeJoy of his time.
Yeah, right. So, okay. So Jackson got to appoint a whole new cabinet, and then he wanted to reward Van Buren for, engineering this whole scheme and ridding him of those troublesome petticoats. So Andrew Jackson, via recess appointment, named Van Buren ambassador to Great Britain, which, as you might imagine, was the most important ambassadorship in this country in 1831. But when the Senate reconvened in 1832, Vice President Calhoun maneuvered to try and deny Van Buren that ambassadorship. So he got Henry Clay, and that is another rabbit trail, I promise I won't go down it. He got Henry Clay to publicly oppose Van Buren's appointment on the grounds that it was, a corrupt political New York payoff, right? And that led New York Senator William L. Marcy to rise to his fellow New Yorker Van Buren's defense. And I did not know who Marcy was until I started researching this segment, but you will recognize his words because they survive to this day. So here was Marcy's defense of Van Buren's appointment as ambassador to Great Britain. It may be, sir, that the politicians of the United States are not so fastidious as some gentlemen are as to disclosing the principles on which they act. They boldly preach what they practice. When they are contending for victory, they avow their intention of enjoying the fruits of it. If they are defeated, they expect to retire from office. If they are successful, they claim as a matter of right the advantages of success. They see nothing wrong in the rule that to the victor belong the spoils of the enemy.
Oh, I see where we're going now.
Yeah. So despite that rather, candid plea from Marcy of, hey, the Senate deadlocked 50-50 on Van Buren's appointment, which allowed Vice President Calhoun to cast the tie-breaking vote against his own president to reject the nomination. And then he said of casting this vote, "It will kill him dead. It will kill him dead. He will never kick, sir, never kick." Although I think Van Buren actually got the last laugh here, since he replaced Calhoun as Jackson's vice presidential running mate in 1832 and then won the presidency in his own right in 1836.
Womp womp.
Yeah, okay. But Liz, as you suggested, to the victor belong the spoils then became the rallying cry of government for the next half century. Like, we win, we get to reward our guys. And I guess I should say here, the spoilage system is really a complicated system, particularly how it interacts with racism and the Civil War. That is way beyond the scope of this segment. I just don't want to be overly reductionist. But look, it's not hard to see that when you have 50 years of, hey, cushy government jobs are how we reward our supporters, that leads to a hell of a lot of graft and corruption.
I think you're coming to Project 2025 soon.
It is, I promise you. And to tie this together, we're going to fast forward 50 years to 1881, the golden age of mutton chops.
Okay, now I know that you're a little bit older than I am, but I am quite sure that the golden age of mutton chops was when our dads. Come on, did your dad not have like amazing mutton chops in the late 60s?
my dad had a glorious mustache, but no mutton chops. So
my dad, mutton chops.
I think my dad would look good with mutton chops. Anyway, 1881, recently elected President James Garfield, who was an opponent of that to the victor go the spoil system, right? He was assassinated by a guy who wanted some of those spoils, 6 months into his presidency. And that finally galvanized support for reform. So Democrats ran on it in the midterm elections, and they won. They took control of the Congress in 1882, and then when Congress convened in 1883, they passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. And the purpose of that law was to replace to the victor belong the spoils with a merit-based system. It created what is known today as the Merit Systems Review Board, and it is still with a lot of amendments, good law today. It's throughout Title V of the U.S. Code. Specifically, 5 U.S.C. Section 2301 sets forth the principles of the merit system, which is that recruitment for the civil service should be from qualified individuals from all segments of society, and selection and advancement should be determined solely on the basis of relative ability, knowledge, and skills after fair and open competition, which assures that all receive equal opportunity.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little rabbit trail myself because this segment is pretty pro-merit system, and I agree it should be. But we should acknowledge that the original method of implementing the merit system was maybe a little problematic. It was through a series of exams that probably felt reasonably objective in the 19th century, but by the late 20th century, they kind of were a little literacy testy. So a bunch of civil rights attorneys challenged the application of the civil service exam at that time in a case called Luvano v. Campbell, which was settled in 1981. And as a result of that settlement, today, merit-based considerations are more than just your score on any one test, which is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, completely agree. And those complex considerations are protected through 5 U.S.C. 2302, which specifically prohibits hiring, firing, granting, or denying promotions or employment decisions on the basis of 14 different things. And I'm going to summarize because this would, runs to 3 pages. So 1, decisions that discriminate on the basis of a protected class. 2, soliciting or considering any recommendation other than a performance evaluation. 3, coercing or retaliating against the political activity of a government employee. 4, lying to any applicant about their right to compete for a job. 5 and 6 are about putting your thumb on the scale for or against any applicant for promotion within the civil service. 7, this would be nice, prohibiting hiring relatives. 8 and 9 deal with protection against retaliating against whistleblowers. 10 is about discriminating on the basis of conduct which does not adversely affect the performance of the employee or applicant or the performance of others, right? So in other words, you can't say like, this guy's weird in this particular, it has to be based on performance. 11, discriminating against veterans. 12, in any way, this is the catch-all provision, violating the general principles of Section 2301. 13, by requiring secrecy. And 14, by accessing their medical records.
Yeah, so that's a pretty robust set of enforcement mechanisms, and it's impossible to overstate how important they are to maintaining the merit system, and with it, the modern functioning of the administrative state. So today, those Section 2302 protections cover more than 90% of the almost 3 million people who are employed by the federal government. It does not cover high-level policymakers, including anyone who is a principal officer requiring confirmation by the Senate.
Yeah, put a pin in that for now.
Correct. But in general, that exception makes sense, right? The merit system means that if someone is good at their job, it doesn't matter if they're gay or Muslim or a rabid Trump supporter or whatever. Like you let them do their job. But okay, a president shouldn't be stuck with a Secretary of State who disagrees with his foreign policy, even if, that person is really good at her job. So for a very limited class of civil servants, the president can make political hirings and firings because elections do have consequences. And that dividing line, that is, high-level policymakers can be fired for political reasons, but the people who do the hard work cannot and stay from administration to administration, has been the cornerstone of the way the federal government operates for the past 150 years. It's not controversial, right? This is the key to hiring a competent government. But look, you see where this is going, right? If you are a member of a political party that doesn't want the government to function, and you think the administrative state is the worst possible four-letter word, you probably hate the merit system, the same way you hated Chevron deference. So you'd love to see government jobs go to unqualified weirdos on the basis of how much they love Donald Trump. And when they suck at their jobs, that's just proof that those jobs should be outsourced to the private sector anyway.
Yeah, and that is why 2 weeks before he lost the 2024 election, Trump promulgated Executive Order 13957, creating Schedule F in accepted service. That is, accept, E-X-C-E-P-T-E-D. Right. And now it's time to pull that pin. Because, Liz, you pointed out that the merit system applies to more than 90% of the federal civil service. The rest are accepted under two provisions as set out in 5 U.S.C. Section 2302, subsection A to B. So subsection number 1 excludes any position accepted from the competitive service because of its confidential, policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating character. Okay. And then subsection 2 excludes any position excluded from coverage of this section by the president based on a determination by the president that it is necessary and warranted by conditions of good administration.
And that is a loophole you can drive a truck through because, again, our laws were not built to withstand a president like Donald Trump who does not care about norms and feels no shame. So Trump's executive order, that was 13957, fines, let's put that in air quotes, the conditions of good administration make necessary an exception to the competitive hiring rules and examinations for career positions in the federal service of a confidential, policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating character. These conditions include the need to provide agency heads with additional flexibility to assess prospective appointees without the limitations imposed by competitive service selection procedures. So in plain English, without the limitations imposed means without the protections of. So everyone affected by this executive order could be interrogated for their loyalty and fired for openly political reasons. And Trump and his allies who think that there's a deep state out to get him, and the Project 2025 guys from Heritage, are not shy about shouting from the rooftops that they do intend to fire every single civil servant who isn't 100% loyal to Trump.
Yeah, and who would have been affected by this executive order? It's actually impossible to know because in trying to implement this massive exception, Trump created a new category of jobs accepted from the merit system, which said positions of a confidential, policy determining, policy making, policy advocating character, not normally subject to change as a result of a presidential transition, shall be listed in Schedule F, right? So everything that we didn't used to change, we now want to change, right? So Trump proposed to create this new Schedule F, and so long as any government job affected policy, advocacy, or had access to confidential information, and look, that's all of them, right? That could be listed on that new Schedule F. Trump's Office of Management and Budget, for example, immediately petitioned after the executive order to have 68% of its employees classified as Schedule F. So yeah, this is a proposal to end the merit system and return to the spoils system of the 1840s. And look, fortunately, right now we're speaking of this in the past tense because President Biden, it shall be pointed out, on his second day in office, repealed that executive order before it could take effect, and then had his Office of Personnel Management promulgate a final rule reaffirming merit-based protection for government employees. For now. Because if Trump wins in November, he has promised to reinstate Schedule F on day one. So we've said a lot, but vote for Kamala Harris, people. And of course, reinstating Schedule F is a part of Project 2025. But unlike the proposals that we went through in the first segment, they're mostly trying to keep the quiet part quiet on this one, right? It is mentioned only 5 times in the text of the documents in 922 pages. And then it also shows up in 3 footnotes that link to Trump's executive order. And mostly it just asserts that Schedule F should be reinstated without saying why, right? Because we all know the why. The why is to make government less effective. So the Project 2025 document says that Schedule F was reversed by President Biden at the demand of the civil service associations and unions, which, you can almost hear its intended audience hissing at the word unions, and should be reinstated. And then goes on to describe Schedule F as a proposal regarding accountability in hiring, which is, a rather curious way to describe making someone take a loyalty oath. So, you get the idea.
Yeah, I'm going to take issue, just a tiny issue with you on that one, which is that I don't think that the purpose of this is to make the government less effective. I think this is to make the Trump administration more effective in carrying out what are really clearly Christo-fascist goals, right? Remember Sally Yates? Right, Sally Yates, who said, I'm not going to do what you've told me to do. And remember Rod Rosenstein, whom Trump appointed and then threatened to throw in jail. Rod Rosenstein saying, Jeff Sessions recused and Rod Rosenstein appointed, Mueller and refused to fire Mueller, and Comey refused to, to back off on the investigation of Mike Flynn. I think what they want is a civil service beholden only to Trump that's basically his Praetorian guard and will do whatever he says because look, remember when he tried to rat fuck the census by saying that it could only count citizens, or it could only, that undocumented people and non-citizens shouldn't count. I think what they want is a civil service that'll break the law and won't care and will be deadly effective in doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a porque no los dos, right?
Yeah, fair, yeah.
For the upper levels of the civil service, absolutely making sure that you never have careerists who, will stop you from, appointing Jeff Clark as the new attorney general. 100% in total agreement. But when I say that the OMB wants more than 2/3 of its employees reclassified, that's all the way down to the GS-12 level. And that is just so we can go back to, oh, hey, Terpsichore, you worked on the Trump campaign. Congratulations. Here's a 6-figure government job for which you are utterly unqualified. Enjoy all the Doritos.
All right. I think we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you guys so much.
Enjoy all the Doritos, people.
Enjoy all the Doritos. Yeah. We will be back on Monday with written content, as always, and we will be back on Tuesday with another podcast. And have a lovely, lovely weekend and get excited. I don't know about you, Andrew. I feel more hopeful than I have in several weeks.
Hear, hear.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Law and Chaos Podcast is a production of Raise Up to Media, LLC, is intended solely as entertainment, does not constitute legal advice, and does not form an attorney-client relationship. This show is researched and written by Liz Dye and produced by Bryce Blankenagel. Law and Chaos Pod, copyright 2024, Raise Up to Media, LLC, all rights reserved.